Hello, genealogists. It's Craig again. My friends are telling me that by saying Craig again, you all might think my name is Craig again. It's not. But anyway, this is Craig again from Just Genealogy. And today we're going to talk about Lord Dunmore's War. Actually, there's a lot of controversy about Lord Dunmore's War. There's a group of people who actually believe that Lord Dunmore's War is the first battle of the American Revolution. Delusions are a marvelous thing, my friend. I'm a genealogist, a microhistorian, not really a historian, but yes, a historian. Let's call myself an independent scholar. If you look at all the pieces of Lord Dunmore's War, and we'll look at some of those today, you'll see that there was no way this was the first battle of the American Revolution. First of all, the head of the group was Lord Dunmore. Now, Lord Dunmore was John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore, and he was the governor of Virginia, the colonial governor of Virginia. In fact, he's kind of funny because he was up in New York when he was appointed governor. He tried forever to convince the crown that he shouldn't be the governor of Virginia, that he should stay in New York, and it didn't work out. So anyway, he ended up eventually down in Virginia, and eventually, through various machinations with the Western frontier, he would eventually ask the House of Burgesses in Virginia to declare that a state of war would exist between the Native Americans on the Western frontier, and he asked the militia to be called out. So he created an army of two parts, a northern army of about 1,700 people that he headed north into what would become Pennsylvania, what was then Virginia in his mind, and then a southern army under Andrew Lewis. Meet on 10 October 1774, recognize this is before Lexington and Concord, Cornstalk's forces, Cornstalk was a Shawnee, made up of Shawnee and Mingo Native Americans. So where was Point Pleasant? Well, it's in West Virginia. It's about as far west in West Virginia as you can get. And if you look here on Google Maps, you can see that this is a place where the Kanawha River and the Ohio River come together. Now, among Louise Kellogg's materials, there is a map of Lord Dunmore's War, but Point Pleasant is in the center of the map, but all the places around it didn't exist at the time of the battle. We do have a map of the battle. You can see how the map matches what we have out on Google Maps. I'm sorry I couldn't remove the hospital or the Hampton Roads Inn in Gallipolis. But anyway, it gives you some idea about what the waterway looks like and where everything is. So this southern division of the army, or the left wing, was commanded by General Andrew Lewis. And under him were the Augusta County Regiment, and the surnames and that was commanded by Colonel Charles Lewis. And the surnames of the captains of that unit were Dickinson, Moffett, Matthews, Skidmore, Lewis, Nall, McDowell, McClenahan, Lockridge, Wilson, and Harrison. So the Botetourt Regiment was commanded by William Fleming. It had about 450 men, and the surnames of the company captains were Love, Lewis, Stewart, Ward, Arbuckle, Murray, McClenahan, and Pauling. The Fincastle Battalion, about 350 men, and that's why it's a battalion rather than a regiment. Their captains were Russell, Crockett, Campbell, Bledsoe, Shelby, Herbert, and Floyd. You can tell by some of these names that many of these men are going to be fighting in the Revolutionary War. Not much later. There were independent companies, the Culpeper Minutemen. They had been formed within just a couple of years probably of the battle, getting ready for the Revolutionary War under the command of Colonel John Field, and that was about 40 men. The Dunmore County Volunteers under Thomas Slaughter was about 40 men. Dunmore County, like Fincastle County now, are extinct counties in Virginia. The Bedford County Riflemen under Thomas Buford was 44 men. I don't know if this Thomas Buford is related in some way to the cavalry commander at Gettysburg whose name was Buford. I do know that the Crockett that I mentioned earlier is Joseph Crockett, and he is not the father of Davy Crockett. I checked. So the Culpeper Minutemen were attached to the Augusta Regiment, the Bedford Riflemen to the Botetourt Regiment, and the Dunmore Volunteers and Kentucky Pioneers to the Fincastle Battalion. Colonel William Fleming and Captain Thomas Buford and Robert McClanahan, they were physicians and composed the medical board for the Army. The Reverend Terry was chaplain of the Army. Thomas Posey was chief commissary and quartermaster general. Sampson Matthews was quartermaster of the Augusta Regiment. Thomas Ingalls, quartermaster of the Botetourt Regiment. Anthony Bledsoe was commissary of the Fincastle Battalion. James Hughes was the pack horse master. William McClure, chief driver of cattle. John Warwick was chief butcher. Captain Matthew Arbuckle was chief guide. Frederick Burley was chief Indian spy. And John Coulter was the carpenter. The lead used came from the mines at Fort Chiswell and on the Upper New River. In fact, there's a shot tower. I don't know, not far from Fort Chiswell. I don't know how old that shot tower is, but that's the place where they would take lead and make it into shot. And there is an extant today shot tower off the interstate outside of Wytheville, which is near Fort Chiswell. And at that time, Fort Chiswell was the seat of Fincastle County. And the powder was largely manufactured near Natural Bridge, which is in Rockbridge County. The cattle were from southern counties west of the Blue Ridge, and flour was ground on water mills in the Shenandoah Valley. I have no idea how we have so much information on what was going on with the Southern Army under General Lewis. They met at a place called Camp Union, which was about 25 miles upriver, up the Kanawha River from where Point Pleasant is. A lot of these men had been with Washington at the surrender of Fort Necessity during the French and Indian War, and some had been with Braddock at Braddock's defeat in Monongahela, and others had been with Forbes at the capture of Fort Duquesne. And still others had been with Bouquet in the Ohio wilderness after the French and Indian War, during Pontiac's War. Nearly all of them had been engaged to some extent all of their lives in the border wars. So these people were schooled not only in English military and colonial military systems, but they also knew a little bit about Indian warfare since they'd been living it all their life. The Army wasn't uniformed, except for probably a few officers on the colonial establishment. And they did wear regular military uniforms, but by far the greater number of individuals wore hunting shirts with leather leggings, breeches, caps made from wild animal skins or knit from wool. Each carried a long flintlock rifle or an English musket, and they had bullet pouches and carved powder horns, and they likely all had tomahawks and butcher knives. Many of them had been border rangers in the past years, and that isn't really an offensive kind of thing. That's more of a alert kind of thing. So they were impatient to get into the fray, shall we say. So the fray would sort of look like this. So basically the Indians came across the river in the middle of night at where Addison is on the map and headed south. So you see Addison up in the upper left-hand corner. That's where the Indians crossed the river in the middle of the night. And they came south along the river. Their goal was to attack the camp of Virginians at dawn. And evidently a couple of folk from Captain Russell's company were out hunting deer or whatever, and they came across the Indians sneaking up on them. Meanwhile, the Virginians are sleeping. The Indians fire on the two soldiers. One of them is killed. The other one gets back to camp and raises the alarm, and basically the whole army is saved from destruction, because if those Indians would have come upon the camp at dawn with nobody up, it wouldn't have been a good time. If they would have swept down into the Lewis's army of sleeping Virginians, it would have been not only a defeat, but pretty much total destruction. Because remember that for some strange reason, Lewis has camped with his back to the Kanawha River, and on the other side is the Ohio River. So if you look on this map here, you see the word fort down in the center on the bottom, and that's where the battle actually takes place, and that's where Lewis is camped. So his back is to two rivers. So Isaac Shelby, who will go on to be a person whose name we remember in Kentucky, wrote a description of the battle a few days afterwards. He was a lieutenant in Captain Evan Shelby's company. Isaac Shelby, who we will remember from Kentucky, has an account of the battle. He's a lieutenant under Captain Evan Shelby at the time. And basically he says, on Monday morning, about half an hour before sunrise, two of Captain Russell's company discovered a large party of Indians about a mile from the camp, one of which men was shot down by the Indians. The other made his escape and brought the intelligence. In 2 or 3 minutes after, two of Captain Shelby's came in and confirmed the account. General Andrew Lewis, being informed thereof, immediately ordered out Colonel Charles Lewis to take command of 150 of the Augusta troops, and with him went Captain Dickinson, Captain Harrison, Captain Wilson, Captain Lewis of Augusta, and Captain Lockridge, which made the 1st Division. Colonel Fleming was also ordered to take command of 150 more of the Botetourt, Bedford, and Fincastle troops, meaning Captain Thomas Buford from Bedford, Captain Love of Botetourt, Captain Shelby, and Captain Russell of Fincastle, which made the 2nd Division. Colonel Charles Lewis' division marched to the right some distance from the Ohio, and Colonel Fleming with his division on the bank of the Ohio to the left. Colonel Charles Lewis' division had not marched quite half a mile from camp when, about sunrise, an attack was made on the front of his division in a most vigorous manner by united tribes of Indians, Shawnees, Delawares, Mingos, Tawas, Ottawas, and several other nations. The number not less than 800, but many thought to be 1,000. In this heavy attack, Colonel Charles Lewis received a wound, which in a few hours caused his death, and several of his men fell on the spot. In fact, the Augusta Division was forced to give way to heavy enemy fire. In about a second of a minute after the attack on Colonel Lewis's division, the enemy engaged the front of Colonel Fleming's division on the Ohio. In a short time, the colonel received 2 balls through his left arm and 1 through his breast, and after animating the officers and soldiers in a most calm manner to the pursuit of victory, retired to camp. This loss from the field was sensibly felt by the officers in particular, but the Augusta troops being shortly reinforced from the camp by Colonel Field with his company, together with Captain McDowell, Captain Matthews, and Captain Stewart from Augusta, Captain John Lewis, Captain Pauling, Captain Arbuckle, and Captain McClellan from Botetourt, the enemy no longer was able to maintain their ground and was forced to give way till they were in line with the troops which Colonel Fleming had left in action on the bank of the Ohio. In this retreat, Colonel Field was killed during this time, which was till after 12 o'clock. So they've now fought from sunup to noon, and the action continued to be extremely hot. In close underwood, many steep banks and logs greatly favoring the retreat, and the bravest of the men made the best use of them, whilst others were throwing their dead into the Ohio and carrying off their wounded. We're talking about the Native Americans here. After 12, the action in a small degree abated, but continued except at short intervals, sharp enough until after 1 o'clock. Their long retreat gave the most advantageous spot of ground from whence it appeared to the officers so difficult to dislodge them. It's thought most advisable to stand as a line which was formed about 1.25 miles in length and had sustained till the constant and equal weight of action from wing to wing. It was till about half an hour after sunset they continued firing, scattering shots which were returned to their disadvantage. At length, night coming on, they found safe retreat. They had not satisfaction of carrying off any of our men's scalps, save 1 or 2 stragglers whom they killed before the engagement. Many of their dead they scalped rather than we should have them, but our troops scalped upwards of 20 of their men that were first killed. It is beyond doubt their loss in number far exceeds ours, which is considerable. So that gives you some idea about what went on during the battle. So today, at that place, there is the Tuendi Way State Park. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. and it's located at the confluence of the Kanawha River and the Ohio River in downtown Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I've been there many times. The park commemorates that battle fought between the settler militia of Virginia and the forces of the Shawnee Chief Cornstalk on October 10th, 1774. There is a memorial there. I think it's 84 feet, 94 feet, something like that. There is a statue to Andrew Lewis. Andrew Lewis will go on and fight in the Revolutionary War, but in 1777, he's a brigadier general in the Revolutionary War. In 1777, he's passed over, much like Arnold and Stark, for major general, and he resigns his commission, and he goes and does other things, generally in the West. So there are some really good books on the Battle of Point Pleasant. The history of the Battle of Point Pleasant is done by Virgil Lewis, and he was the archivist of West Virginia, so had access to a lot of things relating to the battle. The Trans-Allegheny Pioneers, West Virginia and Ohio historical sketches of the first white settlers west of the Alleghenies, 1748 and after, by John Hale, provides some insight into the political machinations of Dunmore in trying to get access to the lands north of the Ohio and extracting the Native American population from there. One of the better books, I think, is Thwaites and Kellogg's documentary History of Dunmore's War, and it is full of basically transcriptions of documents that relate to the war. There's also information, if you've got Indian Wars of Pennsylvania, that deal with all of those things. Don't forget that Dunmore went up into Pennsylvania before he came south. Cornstalk's thought was he would attack Lewis first, take care of Lewis, and then turn and take care of Dunmore. It just didn't work out that way. Although my absolute favorite book on Lord Dunmore's Little War, because of the number of names in it, is Lord Dunmore's Little War of 1774. His captains and their men who opened up Kentucky and the West to American settlement by Warren Skidmore with Donna Kaminsky. This book has been out of print for a couple of months, and I've just brought it back into print. Unfortunately, as a paperback, it used to be a hardback. And this book is just full of names. And that's why I like it. So this is what Point Pleasant looked like in 1819. And if you look at the bottom of the L, that's basically where the state park is today. Point Pleasant is a great place to visit. I always, if I'm headed for Ohio, coming up from North Carolina, there is a way to get to Ohio by way of Point Pleasant. And I try to take that way as many times as I have time. It's not the quickest way, but it's my favorite way. There also used to be a museum in Point Pleasant that Martha and Ruth, a couple of sisters, used to run. There was a fire, and I haven't been in touch with them. But after I do this, I'm going to get in touch with them and see how they're doing and see whether they've reestablished their museum or how it all ended up. They were in a temporary structure for a while, a few years back. I haven't been since before COVID. There also is something else interesting in Point Pleasant that doesn't exist anywhere else. And I'm not really going to talk about it. I'm just going to show you the Mothman. So Point Pleasant is the home of the Mothman and the Mothman Museum. Another reason to go to Point Pleasant, although I've never been inside the museum, I've taken pictures of the Mothman many times just because it's an interesting story. Google it. So this has been Craig with Just Genealogy, converting people doing genealogy into genealogists day by day. Please click that subscribe button. Please hit that notification button. It's going to take me a while to clean this one up. It's probably going to take me hours. This was a lot of fun to put together for you all today. We'll provide a 20% discount on each of the books. The Battle of Point Pleasant, the Trans-Allegheny Pioneers, Dunmore's War, the Wars of Pennsylvania, and Skidmore's book on Lord Dunmore's War. And the code will be Dunmore. And that code will be available for a while. Thank you all so very much. Have a pleasant day. and I'll talk to you tomorrow.